Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and hello. Thank you for connecting with us today. Today's webinar is around understanding the Commercialisation Fund managed by AMGC. My name is Kelly Gordeau and I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs at AMGC, and I'll be hosting today's event on behalf of my colleagues. Before we kick off, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Joining me virtually, as you may be able to see, are two of my fellow AMGC colleagues. Mark Peters is our National Director of Projects. Mark is responsible for managing the end-to-end projects or the process of those projects, from how they are approved and through to their final acquittal. It's a very thorough process and one that follows strict guidelines to ensure that we do the very best by taxpayers' investments for commercial outcomes. So Mark will be walking us through that entire process today, so everyone has a very clear idea of how that works. In addition, Jane Ashton. Jane is our Senior Financial Analyst at AMGC. Jane has a very distinguished career in managing financial transactions and runs a pretty tight ship in project funding payments and milestone reporting. And Jane does that reporting back to our department, which is the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. And as well, Jane manages the contract side of things as well. So today, Mark and Jane will be walking everyone through the Commercialisation Fund. Just some quick housekeeping measures before we start. This session is being recorded. It will be made available along with these slides that you will see. They will be posted to AMG's website after the event. Second, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We encourage you to use that. We will ask that everyone holds their questions until the end of the presentation. You may find that a lot of your questions will be answered throughout the presentation. However, we do encourage you to use the Q&A feature down the bottom, and I will be forwarding those questions onto Mark and Jane at the end of the presentation. And finally, this event is booked for an hour, so thank you for your time. We will make sure that we respect your time and we will finish at 1 o'clock daylight time. So let's get started. So we have the slides up. What you will hear today is what is the Commercialisation Fund. We'll just take you through that. It's $30 million, but Mark will be giving you a bit more detail on what that means. They are aligned to the 6 national manufacturing priorities, so we will go through what they are very briefly. We will share with you what support materials are available, so you'll be able to lean on those if you have any questions, and you'll get an idea of how the Commercialisation Fund is processed. And that will take us to the next step about what is that process and what to expect. We thought it'd be a good idea just to give you a live walkthrough of the Good Grants platform. That is the tool that you will use to submit your application. And we thought that it might be a good idea just to take you tab by tab on what is expected. And Jane will be giving you that walkthrough, as well as Jane will be explaining what are these milestone threshold payments, how does it work, what does co-funding actually mean, and then we'll leave you with the next step slide. So it's a pretty brief presentation to allow time for Q&A at the end, but that's the agenda for today. So let's kick that off. And so Mark, if I may hand that to you, you're on mute, so I may ask you kindly to come off mute and to please walk everyone through what is the Commercialisation Fund. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Kelly. AMGC has been very fortunate to have received an additional $30 million in project funding to continue the good work it's done over the last couple of years, when we've put together about 60 to 80 projects with similar goals and aims and ambitions, etc., around manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, around growing Australian manufacturing in a competitive way. The fund will be supporting projects in the national manufacturing priority areas as part of the modern manufacturing strategy, which I'll talk a little bit about later in terms of what these national manufacturing priorities are. This will be achieved in consultation with a steering committee comprising 5 industry growth centres, CSIRO representatives and a departmental representative. The $30 million commercialisation fund needs to be committed by June 30, 2022. However, timelines and quality are paramount, which will become very evident in my presentation to you today. I have, in fact, to allocate approximately $20 million by June 30 of this year. So I've got about 4 months to accept applications, vet them, go to stage 2, and then get them through the various assessment committees to get them approved finally by a board. And then I've got another $10 million, which needs to be allocated by June of next year. So that'll be a little bit easier, damn sight easier for me. So I might even get a game of golf in with a bit of luck. Okay, Commercialisation Fund is industry-led, and it's to finish between technology readiness levels 6 to 9. It doesn't start there and finish. You can start at TRL 3 and 4, but you have to finish between 6 and 9. And this is something that people have had a little bit of trouble understanding, but hopefully that will become clearer as we go through this. Okay, the Commercialisation Fund is open. It opened nearly 2 weeks ago. We have received a significant number of applications. A lot are in progress at the moment. So I think, you know, once we finish this presentation today, I think it would be very good if you added very quickly in submitting your application or preparing for it. So it's open, it is continuous, it is competitive. So not all applications will be, some applications will be judged better than others. Therefore, we may sort of say, look, you know, unfortunately, even though your application is quite sound, there are other better applications with better value for money, etc. So they're the sorts of things that we will you know, use our judgment on. It'll continue until the funds have exhausted. I'll only be allocating 20 million this financial year and then 10 million the following financial year, but that following financial year you might find the funds are gone by Christmas. So just be aware of that. And the final thing, and something I really want to emphasize in today's conversation, and that is the quality of the application. I've already received 2 applications where the applicants did 2-liners. They rushed it, did 2-liners for every question, and I immediately sort of said, sorry, but you have to go back to start. It's been rejected. Start again, and please look at the various documentation we've provided for you so you can make sure that you do have a quality project application. And that quality relates back to the competitiveness. If the quality is not there, it won't be competitive. So just be well aware of that fact. On the next slide, we'll talk about the collaboration that we're going to achieve with the Commercialisation Fund. When the slide changes, which it did now, you'll see that we're going to actually work with other growth centres, all the other growth centres. There's probably one of the first times that true collaboration has occurred within the growth centres by virtue of their technical and market expertise input into our project application triage committees. We're going to get a tremendous boost to the quality and the efficacy, I think, of the actual project applications. Their input has already been tested with a few triage committees for some early applications, and that's been proven to be very beneficial. So I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues within those growth centres and with CSIRO as well. Okay, so we talked about the 6 national manufacturing priorities. You can see them up there. They're fairly broad and then in some cases very narrow. Examples of the types of projects which will be eligible under each of the 6 manufacturing priorities are contained in the guidance to applicants, which we'll talk about later. And they're also on the first page of the application. So I'll give you a few examples. Food and beverage includes the manufacture of value-added and innovative products and packaging used to process agricultural produce from basic preparation to elaborately transformed or enhanced beverages across the food and beverage manufacturing chain. So it's not just, do I have a new product that I want to manufacture? Resources, manufacture of products or services that improve the resources sector technology, competitiveness and sustainability. So we're a little bit broad in some of the aspects. So please look at those examples that we've provided in the guidelines and also in the first page of the application. So that's what we talk about when we talk about the national manufacturing priorities and which sorts of projects are eligible as such. Okay, on our next slide, you'll see what support materials are available for you to use in your applications. Now, the first one is a fairly extensive guidance to applicants that contains a wealth of information about what's eligible, what's not eligible, what the process is, the types of projects we're looking for, what our focus is on, etc., etc. So please read that document. It's fairly lengthy. Just skim it, but please read it. You might find some things there that may aid you in your application process. The second one is merit criteria. We have 16 merit criteria, and I won't go through all of them, but we do have 16 merit criteria that we use to assess each project at the project triage stage as such. You'll note that some of the criteria score 10 or more, but that's on the next slide, I think, so I'll leave it till then. The third support material we've got available to you is our frequently asked questions. We've got about 30 odd frequently asked questions. It's not exhaustive, but we've attempted to try and give you some advice or some ideas or answers so that you don't have to sort of contact us for questions, etc. And probably finally, the most important document that you've got available to you before you start is a project application example. Now, we're going to go through that today, and Jane's going to take us through that, and I'll provide a few comments on the way. But this is probably the most important document, as it will give you an indication of the degree of detail required for our project applications. I've been doing them now for about 3 years for my board, and they're very sort of demanding in terms of the quality of the project application. So I'll be adhering to that same quality. So I will need the detail to be able to explain to the board why we should fund that program, that project. So detail equals quality, quality equals competitiveness of your application. So the more detail, the better the quality, the more competitive your application can be. So I can't be more explicit in talking about that. So we'll get to that later. Okay, the merit criteria, I think that is our next slide from memory. And I won't go through each of the criteria, but you'll note that some of the criteria, the score is 10 and some is 5. You may not be used to these sorts of merit criteria in previous grant applications you've done, but AMGC is different. We like to really research the project. We want to know what your value proposition is. We want to know your pathway to commercialisation. We want to know what your growth is. We want to know what your export revenues are. We want to know how many jobs you're going to create and what those jobs are. We want to know, is it solving an insoluble, well, a problem up till now in Australian manufacture or Australian industry? So we want to know a whole lot of things about your application, which you will see. So, jobs, for instance, we allot 1 point for every additional 5 FTEs employed during the project and with 1 year of the project completion. That includes also possibly jobs that you're going to generate through subcontract manufacturers or collaborators that are going to be working with you. Another example is increase in export revenues. This is highly regarded by us, but all of these merit criteria are in the guidelines, are on our webpage. So please make sure you have a look at that so that you know what emphasis we're going to put on scoring your particular project as such. Okay, so next, the process itself. I won't go through the whole thing. It's there, it's in our guidelines. You can have a look at that, read it through there. But what I will focus on is that number one, you're going to have to allow 12 weeks for approval. That's the sort of time it's going to take to get it through the assessment process I've been given. So your start dates on milestones should reflect this. So don't put in a project application with a start date next week. Put in a project application which is going to start in 10 weeks from when the minute you press that submit button. The assessment process that we go through, this is in detail and contained in the guidance to applications, but I want to talk about this assessment process. Basically, first of all, the project applications come to me and I look at the quality if it's it's below the quality that I think will be necessary for the triage committee to assess it, I write a letter to that person, that applicant, and say very politely that we cannot support the application in its current form. Please go back and have a look at the amount of detail required and look at the documentation on our website. So once it does get accepted for triage, it then goes to our triage committees. We've got 6 of these, I think, and each of them is a specialist triage committee, one for medical, one for resources, one for clean energy, one for recycling, one for space, defence, and food and beverage. I may have forgotten 1 or 2, but basically we want to sort of make sure we've got expertise within that triage committee to be able to make an assessment of that project application. And we basically score it out of 50, out of 100, and we want to see at least a score of 50 across the board. Each triage committee member has the opportunity to critique and criticise other people's scores or give reason for his scores. As I said, we had one yesterday, which was quite interesting. And, you know, we sort of came away with a very, what's the word, consensus approach to how we go forward with other projects, etc. And hadn't quite finished there. Have I run out of time, Kelly? Anyway, okay, so what I want to also mention that, okay, if it gets through the triage process, that's when I put the rubber to the road, and I'll contact you and I'll actually talk to you and talk you through your application, and then probably knock it into a shape that I think will be more acceptable to my board. I'll discuss it with you, I'll liaise with you. I will probably ask you some difficult questions about your application. I'll ask you to validate a lot of the information that you've supplied. I will be a bit of a bad cop in that situation, but once we get on top of that and we're good to go, I'm a good cop, and I'll make sure that your project application gets processed very quickly through the various stages that we then have to go through for final acceptance by our board. But just so that you know that I'm there to help you after you get to stage through the triage stage. I'll be there sort of assisting you in finalising your application and making sure it's a great application. Okay, the next slide we're going to talk about a good grant slide demonstration, and for this I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jane Ashton, who is going to basically take us through the example that it shows on our website. So you're going to get a feel for how XYZ completed this application, and in saying that, this application is a combination of previous successful applications that I've processed. So basically the ones the board has approved. So the types of information that I've supplied is relevant to your application. So please take note of that application, and we'll get Jane to go through that now with us. Over to Jane, who's on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to take you through the application on Good Grants, which is the application we're going through, as Mark said, is an amalgamated one, but it's the same as the one that you can download from the AMGC website. When you initially click on the link to go to the grant platform, you will need to register an ID for yourself if you haven't already done that, and you'll automatically be registered as an applicant. And then you will go to My Applications and submit, start your new application. So this is where you would start on the Eligibility tab, which covers the information that's needed in order to enable an organisation to even submit an application in the first place. So the category is already pre-filled for you. So you would put in the project title, the legal registered entity name of your business. We need the ACN, ABN, and then the next question is the radio button about GST. So funding is only available to Australian registered companies who are also registered for GST. So that's the reason for those questions. The national manufacturing priorities in the next section are the sectors to which the government has chosen to address this round of funding. So they're the sectors that the government wants to see you know, advancing the manufacturing processes in Australia. So please, on this section, please only make one selection, and we do understand and appreciate that there are some projects that do genuinely fit into more than one, priority category, but please select the one that is the best fit for this project. Selecting more than one may dilute the visibility of the project in the area of best fit. So just select one. And then further down on the documentation that you need to submit to us, there's a checklist here. The checklist is optional, so you can use that if you like, but the documents are not optional. The only one that we actually require is a letter from your accountant confirming financial viability of the business for this project. There is a template. If you look to the right, there's a link there, and that's a template that you can upload, download, and use for your accountant to complete. The other documents we would like to see, if you have them available, is a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet for both for the last 3 years if you have them, a strategic plan if you have one, and an investor deck or investor pack if you have one of those. Although we do recognise that some smaller businesses won't have all of those documents, but you know, as many of those as you have would be good. And then you tick the box to confirm that the application meets the above criteria so that you are eligible to apply for the grant. Now, you can move through this application form by using the tabs at the top of the page, but I would prefer or please use the save and next or save and close. If you want, you can save and exit and then return to your application if you wish, but use save and next to move on to the next tab, because otherwise you may find that you're losing information that you've already input. So on to the next tab, which is all about the lead applicant, the lead applicant organisation. So generally, this is going to be the project leader who's going to receive the funding in the event of a successful application and who will be responsible for project outcomes. So the tab has questions about business size, structure and ownership, as well as the sub-industries and the geographic markets that are served. So these questions all relate to AMGC's research over the last 5 years that we've conducted, and also the reporting that we need to do for the government to ensure that the funding is going to good use. The final question on this tab is where you must declare if you are applying for any other grant funding, which you are able to do, but you need to make sure that your co-funding element can be sequestered between the two applications. So if you apply to Commercialisation Fund for, you know, $400,000, you need to match that 400. If you apply to another grant that also for $400, you need $400,000. I'm sorry, you need $800,000. You need to be able to show that you can match both of those funds separately. So that's a point of information that you should bear in mind. And then the next tab is all about the project itself, information about the project itself. And this is where you will need to outline all the details of the project, starting with the amount of funding that's requested and the duration of the project, and going all the way through to expected jobs and revenue. So this tab is where most of the merit scoring takes place. And so I'll just hand you back to Mark now to talk about those, if that's okay, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Yeah, first of all, the description of the project. We just need that to sort of be able to sort of very quickly assess whether this project fits within the national priority areas. There's no scoring involved, but it gives us a very good insight into whether this project really has some legs as such, and go from there. But the first scoring one is, what is the industry problem, manufacturing problem being addressed by this project? And as you can see, 500 words, fairly important. You should find that most of the word, allowances are sufficient. Very rarely would I think you'd go over that. So basically, as you can see in this one, there was a significant problem in the industry, in as much as there were safety issues. There was situations where power went down, and this particular solution was going to fix that. But just say, what is the problem? What are the dangers? I had one once where, a gold mine collapsed over in South America, and that was because of water or storms affecting dewatering. The ponding. The company came up with a solution for that, so it would have saved a lot of lives if that had happened. So look for something that is a problem and that your solution will overcome. So that one's got 5 points. So it's not as important as the next one, which is the proposed solution. And you can see I've got 1,000 words here because I want you to provide a lot of detail on the superiority of that particular solution compared to other people. I want you to talk about the tech that you're employing, the technology you're employing, and in some cases, or at some stage, you've got to talk about your competition. And I think that's more on the value proposition side, but you've got to make sure you're aware of your competition, because I'll be certainly looking at that when I'm doing my assessment. I'll be going on the website and I'll be I'll Google what your solution is, and I'll see if any other people are doing it, etc. So I'll make sure that that is a very real solution, and it has got technical superiority. The next one is the value proposition, I think, and that is, research competitors and show that your tech is superior once again. All very well to have a solution, but there's no value proposition. There's no, you can't sell it. What the heck? You're not going to sort of go anywhere anywhere with that project after you actually have invested a significant amount of your money in the project. So it's a bit of a sort of make sure you understand what you're doing sort of thing, just to make sure it's going to work in the long run. Next one is all about advanced manufacturing. We've got a number of advanced manufacturing techniques we would like to see in practice. You don't have to. You'll score more if you, in the second part, what advanced manufacturing techniques will introduce during the project. So the more you can do in those, the better, but it's not the be all and end all. Once again, we've got 16 scoring criteria. If you fail on one, you're not going to fail in the whole thing. So, if you fall down on one, I'm not going to sort of not go ahead with your project as such. Next one is reshoring. Reshoring is reshoring manufacturing from overseas. There's a lot of that happening at the moment with the various COVID supply chain issues we've encountered. But more importantly, are we replacing imports, or are we going to stop imports from entering Australia? Because you've got a project, or you've got a product that is highly competitive, very competitive globally, and in fact, that competitive, you can export it to other countries, etc. So there's no way they're going to start importing product to compete with yours in Australia if yours is better. Number of jobs, etc. Basically, we score for every 5 jobs, you get 1 point, and that's both the jobs that are at during the project and the jobs within 1 year of completion of the project. So basically, and also including that, anyone that will be in your supply chain. So if you're creating jobs by collaborating with subcomponent suppliers, make sure you write that there and make sure you explain that to us so that we understand where you're coming from. So jobs are very important to us, so please focus on that. Technical readiness level. We've got a list of what they are, so you'll be able to sort of select that. Bear in mind that there they are there. That's the definitions. Bear in mind that we want 9. If between 6, you've got to finish between 6 and 9. But your project finishes at 5. It's not an eligible project, so it's got to finish between 6 and 9. Next part, market research, very important. We want to know how big the potential market is. All very well to develop a product, have a great value proposition, but if you've got no market, what the heck? You got to make sure you've got a market for that product before you invest your money and I invest my money in your project as such. So very important that you conduct market research before we go to finalising the project. And equally important is the business model. How are you going to actually get your product to market? What in here I want you also to talk about local manufacturing partners. We're not going to fund offshore manufacturing. So talk about your local manufacturing partners as part of that commercialisation or pathway to commercialisation, and also talk about what distribution channels you're going to use, et cetera, and one of the best things you can do is have one of your collaborators being a big OEM overseas or whatever, who's going to give you immediate market access. So they're the sorts of things you need to explore there. We're then going to talk to you about or ask you to estimate your additional revenue and then how you can justify that revenue. So that's fairly important. I think it's worth about 5 marks from memory, those two components together. So make sure that you look at that fairly closely and give me some good detail on the results. Export revenue, what are you exporting now and what do you expect to export within 1 year of project completion? And be careful with that one. It's worth a lot of points. It's worth up to 10. So it's something you need to be able to illustrate to me. It'd probably come into the stage 2 and I'll say, okay, and maybe you put it in your pathway to commercialisation. You talk about that export market as such. Okay. And also in your validation. Next, we've got, okay, that's it for the project information. I'll hand back to Jane and she can take us through that next stage.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So the next tab is about the experience of the lead applicant or project manager to manage a project of this nature successfully. So there's only 4 questions, but they are obviously critical for your application. So we are looking for the company's contribution to this project and anything similar that they've done before as part of the track record. Also the financial viability and access to capital to fund the project. So access to capital other than the grant, obviously. And also intellectual properties for intellectual property management. So do you hold patents for any of your existing products and services? Do you have an IP strategy for the products developed under this particular project? Do you have anything to add to that, Mark?
Yeah, I'll just say that on the financial side, if you can supply your P&L and balance sheets, that's great. I'll be able to go through those and ascertain your financial viability. The letter from your accountant, you've seen you'll see the template for that. It's got to be the external accountant, not your internal accountant. And make sure that you've got funding or lines of credit to be able to fund the project. So as much information you can give me to satisfy that financial sort of assurity. It will be something I'll go through with you in the stage 2. So that'll be part of my routine for that. The IP strategy, fairly important, as Jane said. Back to Jane.
Okay. Yep, thank you. The next tab is collaborators, project collaborators. We have sometimes in the past referred to them as project contributors, but we are looking for a more kind of higher level of inclusion, I think. So with the change of terminology. So it collects information about all of your project collaborators, and it's collecting pretty much the same information that we did for the lead applicant. And this is for statistical purposes and for reporting purposes. All the projects need to be collaborative, and we do encourage applicants to include details of their Australian supply chain in the collaboration. And obviously the details of each collaborator. There is a button at the bottom to allow you to, add another collaborator. When you first look at that form, it will only have space for one. It will have a template for one collaborator with a button at the bottom to say add another collaborator, and you repeat the information that gets filled in. We also, as well as Australian supply chain, will also encourage the involvement of one of Australia's research institutions, such as a university or the CSIRO, as collaborators in your project. Anything to add to that, Mark?
No, I think you covered that beautifully, Jane. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then tab 6, budget and milestones. So obviously this is where the whole financial process starts, but there's a budget table at the top where you will be putting in the costs in cash and in kind contributions on a milestone by milestone basis. Now, the tables in Good Grants unfortunately don't support calculations yet. So you'll see below there is a link to a template. It's a Microsoft Excel template where you can check your calculations in that same format as it is above. And then on the milestone tables, you're expanding on the budget by laying out the costs and in kind on a supplier by supplier basis. And so the cost and in kind for milestone 1 needs to equal the cost and in kind that is shown for milestone 1 in the budget. Every milestone needs a start and end date, and we've laid out the form in its initial format for 3 milestones, which is kind of the minimum that we've ever had in a successful application. And you will then be able to add at the bottom, there's a radio button. Do you have another milestone? If you click yes, then the layout for another milestone appears as if by magic below. And that takes us, we've put in the provision for up to 7 milestones, which is the most we've ever had in a successful application. If there are any more than that, you would need to contact us on the application support email. And in order that we'd have to put like a manual edit into that application, but 3 to 7 I think sounds like a reasonable number. Anything on milestones, Mark?
No, I'm fine with that, Jane. Just as long as you put plenty back detail in the activity column so that we can understand what you're doing. Also, as far as the cost is concerned, sometimes it's an estimate, sometimes it's a quote. I'll talk to you more about that when we get to the stage 2 finalisation side.
Okay, thank you. And then tab 7 for risks. This is the final input tab, so to speak. And we've used a quite generic risk table that we used in a previous funding round that addresses the 4 main areas of risk for projects, which are scope creep, schedule, technology, and finance. So the identified risks are down the left, and the risk rating and the strategy for managing those risks are initially blank, and you would need to fill them in. If there are other risks that you need to add, you can add a row to do that. And then the next tab is where you would attach the documents that we ask for in the eligibility tab, right? So the acceptable formats are JPEG and PDF. Again, it shows the letter from the accountant. External accountant is the only one that's required. Everything else is if available. So please do add any drawings or process charts or images which you feel would help to describe the project and help to get the point of the project across. But please don't add any further text documents because the reviewers won't consider them. The written component of the application, as it says there, should be explained within the provided fields. So is there anything further, Mark, that you want to add to that before we go to the co-funding model?
No, I'm happy with what you've explained, Joan.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So co-funding of these projects by the government in this fund means the government is looking for at least an equal cash contribution, a cash investment from industry. So that does not include any in-kind contributions. And the government requires AMGC to monitor that. So our obligation to meet that requirement, what we do is we need to see the lead applicant's contribution to each milestone so that we can ensure hand on heart at the start of every milestone that there is sufficient funding available as per the costings that the lead applicants provided to complete the milestone. A financial process starts, of course, with budget and the milestone plan in the application. There may be some refinement to that during the process that Mark was talking about, where he will contact the lead applicant to ask some difficult questions or go through the approval process. And again, on the budget tab, there is a link to the Microsoft template for people to use, applicants to use to check calculations. So once the application's been through the review and assessment process and has been approved, the lead applicant will then be asked to sign a project agreement. It's a fairly standard contractual agreement, and the funds will be awarded on the basis of the version of the application that receives final approval. So that's after the refinement process. Grant funds are paid out on a milestone by milestone basis, and they are paid in advance. So think of them as enabling payments to enable that milestone to be achieved rather than a reward for the success of that milestone. Milestone 1 is due and paid on signature of the project agreement. Milestone 2 is paid on successful, it says completion, it's successful completion of milestone 1. So the financial funding, because of this in advance payment, the financial funding will be completed before the start of the final milestone. But of course, we do follow up the milestone and ensure that the project is successfully completed. So the equal investment that was mentioned earlier, the way that we ensure that is by we send out an invoice to the lead applicant for their contribution to the milestone. The lead applicant then pays our invoice and invoices AMGC in return for both the grant amount of the milestone and the reimbursement of their own contribution. The process would normally take no more than a week, and we have one pay run per week, which is usually made overnight on Wednesdays. So if I issue an invoice on, say, Thursday, the invoice should be paid by the following Monday with a return invoice. That can then get sent for approval and payment overnight on Wednesday. So we are very aware that we have participant funds that we are holding those, and we are very mindful of getting those out of the door as quickly as possible. So on completion of each milestone, the lead applicant will need to show evidence that the activities described in the milestone have been completed and that the funds have been expended as described. So this will be in the form of, ledger extracts or timesheets for contractors and such, invoices that are being paid to suppliers, things of that nature. We don't have a template for milestone reporting because of the differences between each project and between each milestone in the same project. It can be so vast that it's not, you know, it's not something, a template that could be easily created. But as long as each milestone acquittal is approved by Mark Peters, who's speaking to you today as well, who's our National Director of Projects, and he then issues me the authorisation to start the financial process for the next milestone. So in the budget and the milestone template, you're saying what you're going to do. You get the money to do what you say you're going to do, and then we ask you to show us that you have done it. At the end of the project, the lead applicant will be asked to complete a project finalisation report, which is also for government reporting purposes. And that goes back to the initial research questions at the start of the application, right? So we follow up on those, and we're looking at successes or failures during the project, additional jobs created, upskilling, and the STEM skills used, so which is science, technology, engineering, and maths, I believe. And the domestic and export sales revenue are the things that are most compared to the start of the application. So I think that's it for the funding model. So back to Mark for the next part.
You could have said back to you, Spearsy. A lot of people would have understood that, but back to you, Petersy. Doesn't sound as good, obviously. Okay, next steps. Please go to the AMGC website that you see there, projects. That contains the plethora of information that I want you to read before you start doing your application. Please make sure you look at these documents before you proceed. Then that'll also take you to the Good Grants portal where you can commence your application, and that you'll see a format or a template similar to what Jane's just explained to you. If you do have any queries, make sure you can send emails to applications@AMGC. They go to Jane. Jane will say, Mark, can you answer this? Or she may answer it, Jane may answer it. So it's, you know, it's up to them, up to you. Remember, you cannot submit the application until all the items in the application are covered. It will not let you actually submit it. It'll come up with this great big glaring red thing to say you've missed this, you missed that, etc., etc. So please make sure you complete all the boxes, ticks, and all that sort of thing before you submit it. Finally, it's probably a good idea to join as a member of AMGC while you're sort of going into the projects area. You'll see the membership side. It's free, and we do require both project applicants, lead applicants, and collaborators to be members, so that you know, you can enjoy the wonderful benefits of being part of the AMGC network. That's all from me, I think, at this stage. I think probably now we probably go to questions. Back to my colleague Kelly Godot, and she will take what's her name? She will take us through questions and answers as such.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, we actually have quite a few. So just in the time remaining, let's see if we can briefly get through these. The first one, Mark, is what is the deadline for submission of the grant? You covered this earlier on.
There's no such thing as a deadline. It's open and continuous. So basically, just get it in as soon as you can, folks, because, you know, I've only got 30 million. I've got a significant number of people applying. Yeah, first in, best dressed. Well, not first in, best dressed. First in with great quality is best dressed, and we will be able to assess that accordingly. So there may be situations where your project comes in, it's not quite what we're looking for, but and there are other projects that are better. We may sort of park it and say, look, let's wait until, you know, we get to the end and we'll go from there. But there are a number of things that we'll be looking at.
Great, thank you. Supriya asked, what about jobs that we can create in 2 to 3 years after the product is launched. The current application asks for jobs in the first year. Can we provide long-term view somewhere?
You can, but I'll be, the triage committee will look at the answer to the questions that we've asked. We like to see an immediate impact in funding. You know, this is after the project's completed, which is 18 months' time. I would like to think that you've commercialised the product, and from there on in, you're banging product out and you're increasing your employment because you've been very successful in commercialising it. You've got your markets, you're all set up, ready to go. So we want to see a very immediate impact in employment. So that's why we stick to within 1 year of completion of the project.
Terrific, thank you. I hope that answers your question. From an anonymous attendee, can a company apply for the Modern Manufacturing Initiative grant and the AMGC commercialisation grant at the same time? Are they reviewed by the same panel?
No, two totally different panels. That's why I asked the question, and if you get to stage 2, I'll say, if you've already put your MMF in, which you should have because it's closed, I'll say, how's it going? Where does our project fit in with that? Got to remember that MMF is mainly capital, and we've only got a very small capital content, like only 25% of our project funding can be capital. So it would be a very good complement in a lot of cases with your MMF. But then you might have to make sure you do MMF first and then ours. So look, I'll talk to you during stage 2 and just talk about that aspect and how they can be blended together, but no reason why you can't blend them. For instance, accelerating commercialisation, you might have one at the moment. I've found a lot of my projects, I've followed on from them. They've got up to TRL4. I've taken them from TRL4 to TRL9 with my funding. So, you know, that's how, you know, that's how we look at it.
Terrific, thank you. Wayne Wanders asks, you mentioned the need for an external accountant to certify financial liability. Is this mandatory, especially if your external accountant is really only your tax agent?
Yes, your tax agent should be able to form an opinion as to what lines of credit you have available, and also do a couple of very simple current and liquid asset calculations. I think your tax accountant should be able to provide that service for you. And I'll be looking at your P&L and balance sheet if you have them anyway, and that's going to give me a far greater insight into your financial viability.
Thanks, Mark. Question from Patrick Van Ebergen. Unfortunately, we've lost most of our patents due to COVID-19 and the pandemic because we were unable to continue with the research and development during that time. We could not afford all the fees associated with the next stage. Very frustrating with 7 years of research down the drain. Can the Commercialisation Fund be used to seek new patents?
Yes. Not the whole project, but if it was about 10-20% of the project cost, fine, not a problem. I don't want it to be the one and only thing you do in that project.
Terrific, thank you. Anonymous, does co-contribution include both cash and in kind, or does the cash contribution need to be equal to the funding asked? Yes. Can you just clarify that the cash needs to be equal?
Yeah, the cash, you have to have $150,000 worth of cash to match my $150,000 worth of cash. And then you may elect to get somebody to do some in kind, like a university might do some in kind for you. No, you do have to have equal. It's 50-50, dollar for dollar. It doesn't include in kind.
Thank you. And I just might remind folks to use the Q&A feature down the bottom of the screen. There's a couple of chats coming up on the side. If we have time, we'll get to the chat column, but if you see there's a Q&A little feature down the bottom, please use that one. That's the one that we're scrolling through at the moment. From Jaden Castillo, is it preferable to have many collaborators rather than a few?
Many. I would like to see at least 5 collaborators, including a research institution if possible. It doesn't have to be a research institution, but we find, or AMGC's found that, research institutions working with industry has given industry a tremendous boost because of all the IP they've got sitting on their shelves and the ability to do research for you to validate or commercialize your product. So yeah, About 5 would be normal, and you get to score, I think, if you have a research institution and 5, you'll get 5 out of 5 for that particular project criteria.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Agreed. Question from Tim Lovett. Thank you. This is great. Thanks, Tim. I'm curious, can an application straddle more than one national priority area, or does it need to be more than one application? So if there's multiple national manufacturing priorities, can it straddle multiple ones, or would there be multiple applications? And I think Jane mentioned this earlier. So do you want to cover that up again, Mark?
Yeah, as Jane mentioned, please select the one that's closest to your, the outcome of your project. Which one stands up best for value proposition, pathway to commercialisation, market research you've done, solution to a problem, etc. Please select the best industry that would go with, national priority that would go with. It gets very complicated when you go into 2. You may select one, but mention in your market research and mention in your project application that you do straddle a number of different industries, and that will probably strengthen your application, but just choose one if you don't mind to start with.
Right, Jane?
Yep, correct.
Is there a limit to the number of applications that can be submitted by a single organisation? This is by Michelle Stansfield. We have a couple of projects on the run.
There's no reason. My history with projects is, and I have in the past had a company have 2 projects, but they weren't concurrent. One had to finish, the other one had to start. I've got to spread the love a little bit. I just can't sort of give one company 3 $1 million projects. It's just not fair. So I'd probably say choose your best one. If that one doesn't get through triage, put it in another one. So I would say just one at a time and get it through triage, and then we can sort of go from there as such.
We've got quite a lot of questions, so let's keep going on. This is from Bill. Thanks, Mark and Jane. Is there a predetermined requirement or expectation for effort and input distribution when there's collaborators involved? So is it 50-50 or is it 60-40 for the overall project or each milestone?
In my experience, it's pretty even. I'd say the lead applicant would normally do about 30 to 40% of the work, or gets paid for 30-40% of the work. Sometimes the collaborators do more, but I like to see the lead applicant do most of it if possible. But contribution from a design house, contribution from a manufacturing company, contribution from various other people, patent attorneys, whatever. It varies. There's no strict rule, but don't sort of put in an application where the money goes to just one company, one collaborator. That doesn't make a lot of sense to us. So see if you can spread the load amongst your collaborators if possible.
Thanks, Mark. Great. This is from Lisa Pitre. Is there a minimum, maximum grant amount?
Yes, it's covered in the FAQs and also the guidelines. The minimum amount is 100,000 and the maximum amount is 1 million.
Thanks, Mark.
So that means that there's a project of 200,000 minimum or maximum. Well, there's no maximum, but the maximum grant you can get would be $1 million towards the project. Great.
We've got quite a lot of questions. We're able to stay on the line if people would like to stay on the line. Mark and Jane, I hope that's okay with you. We've got quite a few questions. I think this is helpful. Peter, it looks like Peter asked, is it possible to download the application form?
You can print a PDF. Oh, sorry, Jane.
I was just going to say, you can't download the application form to complete, but you can download a completed application as a PDF. So you can't download it and answer the questions offline. The form needs to be completed online and submitted online, but once submitted, you can download a PDF of the of your application.
Great. The next one is from Paula Bennett. Hi, the AMGC encourages research collaboration, but what if there's no external collaboration? Or maybe what if there's no researcher that you can find to collaborate with?
I'd suggest you contact AMGC, probably a guy by the name of Michael Sharp, who's an expert at collaboration with universities. His details are on our website. Send him an email and say, look, I'm looking for a university to collaborate with. I'm located in such and such a place. Please, can you give me an idea of who give him a few ideas about what your project's about. And that'll, and Michael's, as I said, Michael Sharp is very well connected with universities, as is Michael Grogan, another of our state directors in Victoria. So yeah, that's one answer to your question. The other one is, look, we need more than just yourself. We need collaborators. We need a minimum of 3 collaborators, and I think that's pretty well detailed on the FAQs as such. So, and that can include a research organisation.
Please excuse the transfer. We just need to vacate an office. This is from Stuart Ellis. Is the Commercialisation Fund the only current funding process? i.e., is this on top of the historical funding systems or a replacement of the previous funding system?
Look, you saw the list of other funding out there at the moment. There's MMF, there's MMI, there's CRCP, there's, you know, all the growth centres have got funding in various shapes and forms. So look, there's plenty of funding out there. The MMI one, which was announced recently, that starts at a grant of $1 million and goes up to a grant of 20 million. So if you're a large company, you've got a large project, I suggest you look at that. Our funding is, AMGC's funding is more for SMEs. We're looking more to look after the SMEs and let people with bigger money pits to look at the MMI thing, which is the same national manufacturing priorities, etc. So please look at that.
How are existing staff salaries treated in terms of project contributions if they will need to be dedicated to working on the project?
Okay, when I come to the acquittal stage, and you put in, you've got a project engineer, you've got an electrical engineer, you've got various people working on the project. I ask you to give me an Excel spreadsheet, which shows the actual hourly rate of that person and the number of hours that they've expended on the project. And you'll usually keep that information for your R&D tax incentive calculation or grant that you're looking for. Most people have got that set up quite well. And then basically you add 30% to that. And that's the amount of money that you can claim for your particular staff member. So I will, look at pay slips and things of that nature to validate that, the guy does exist, and you have paid. That's all part of the acquittal process when we get further down the track.
Terrific. Hope that answers that question. A question from Abbas. Thank you, Mark and Jane. Very informative presentation. Just wondering if the more generic sector other than those 6 listed would be considered, in particular something on AI that would have commercial application across all of those industries.
Okay, AI is very much one of the cornerstones of AMGC's competitiveness plan. So what I would do is, I've got one going at the moment with AI, and they've targeted the defence industry, space. So just find which industry your AI software would best be successful in. Engage with people in that industry to say, these are the collaborators we're going to be working with in that industry. Software is something, software only projects are acceptable, are eligible. So please just don't leave it as a product and services and whatever. That's a full value chain of AMGC's smiley curve. We not only do manufacturing, we do design, we do R&D, we do sales, we do service, servitization, a whole range of things. So I hope that answers your question, and you can direct it accordingly. If you've still got a question after this, please send an email to applications@amgc.org.au, which we will endeavour to answer.
Thanks, Mark. And I think Jane mentioned at the beginning that the outcome and the capability of the project needs to meet one of those 6 national manufacturing priorities.
That's correct.
This is from an anonymous attendee. We have developed a satellite-based water management system. It is widely used in food and agriculture and resources and space. Which priority is recommended
basically, where is your market going to be? Is your market going to be in space? Is your market going to be a new market in food and bev? Where is your product going to land? That wasn't a pun on space. So yeah, that's all on food and beverage. So look at where the market is going to land, and that would probably be the thing that determines which box you tick in the national manufacturing priorities.
It's good. Yes, we need to have one priority one. Adam Johnson asks, is partial funding of an asset allowed?
Yeah, when you say partial funding, if you want to buy a piece of machinery to commercialise your product, that's fine. But bear in mind that the maximum of 25% of total project funding can be used for CapEx, as we call it, or capital items.
Great, thank you. John Scoot asks, would you mind going over the question of IP involved with a grant application?
Okay, I don't want to fund a project, or AMGC doesn't want to fund a project where the IP is not kept in Australia, is not Australian owned. We want to develop products and services here in Australia, which remain in Australia, which increase the manufacturing base of the Australian manufacturing industry. So therefore we want the IP to stay here. Your pathway to commercialisation may involve licensing. It's okay, it's not something I love, because it doesn't means not as many jobs in Australia, but it can be that. So when you're doing the IP section, put down your existing patent numbers, which shows that you already have a good strategy, and then talk about what is your strategy going forward with your IP in future and where you're going with it. So it's all about manufacturing in Australia. So please bear that in mind when you're thinking along those IP terms.
Okay, thank you. Lachlan Thurgood asks, would the setup and implementation of a quality management system, QMS, be considered eligible expenditure?
Yes, it would. If that was crucial to your product being technically superior, giving you the, what's the name, the ISO or whatever that would occur because of that. Yes, once again, it's one of those things that if it's a large portion, I'd probably say in stage 2, look, it's dumbed down that a little bit. And, and also, if you're going to, your target market's America and you're going to want to spend a lot of money in America, which you can, by the way, I would try and limit that when I get to stage 2 to, about 20% of the project cost, because I don't want to have a project where I'm paying a whole bunch of US lawyers to get patents registered or, doing market research. I want to pay Australian people to do Australian projects. So just bear that in mind.
Thanks, Mark. Judy Hendricks, are you sending us the recording so we can share this info session with others? Yes, Judy, this recording will be available as well as the slides on AMGC website under the events tab later today. So you'll be able to find it there. Thank you. Hervé Astor asks, sorry I joined late, can some of the money be spent on a collaborator overseas? Yes, providing there is a compelling commercial reason for that. I've had a couple in the past where we've spent money on a collaborator overseas. I wouldn't spend all the money, as I mentioned in a previous question. I'm not going to spend all the money on an overseas person. So I'd limit it to about 20-25% max of the project cost. Yeah, we recognise that for Australian manufacturing to be competitive, sometimes we need to, there is a lot of expertise overseas. Why reinvent the wheel if you got that expertise overseas? So yes is the answer to that question, Hervé. Thank you. Do you review project applications periodically? And will applications that are not successful in one review period automatically be considered in the next review period? I wake up every day to a new application I get to review. So yes, it is continuous. It's a lot of fun. I'm exposed to some amazing technology out there, and I thank you for that, folks. Look, if it's rejected, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It may be that you have to revisit it. You'll get reasons for rejection as such, and I'm quite happy to discuss those reasons with anybody that does
we don't call it rejection, we say not supported. Rejection sounds very negative. We say not supported at this stage. So we will, dialogue with you to hopefully explain why, and then maybe you can resubmit. We'd probably reject it and get you to resubmit so that you get it right the second time around.
Great, thank you, Mark. Andre Ferretto asks, does the medical device require listing of TGA?
That is something that my technical representative from MPT Connect will query. We had a couple yesterday we looked at, just some initial ones that came through very, very quickly. And one of the things that he commented on was that we hadn't asked the question regarding validation of data that was mentioned in their project application. So I'm going to be amending the attachments to include for medical devices the provision of validation and technical data support to support sort of statements made during the project application. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's right, TGA. Look, you should know. If you know your market, if you know your product, you should have done that research to find out whether you do need TGA approval. And there's plenty of ways of finding out whether that's the case. So I can't do that for you. You have to do that.
Okay. John's done some maths. You said it takes 12 weeks for assessment and you need to fund 20 million worth by the 30th of June, which is basically only 12 weeks away. So does this mean there's no point putting an application targeting 30 June funding approval?
You can put any date you like. I'd say for the first tranche, up to June, look, start on July the 1st if you want to, if that's what your thoughts are. If your project can wait that long, by all means do that. And we'll look at that in the stage 2 process and talk about it and discuss it. We might change it, we may not, depending on what time has elapsed by the time we get to that stage 2 discussion as such.
Perhaps also the question was around, given the period of time for the entire process to go through the steering committee and the technical triage, etc., and we do need to allocate funds early, people should get their application in as soon as possible.
I'd say so. If you're putting an application in the month of March, basically it'll take April, May, June to assess it. So I'd put your start date at the 1st of July.
Thanks, Mark. This is from Biz Advisor. If project is beyond R&D and no Australian PFRO, I'm sorry, I don't know what PFRO means, has requisite skill set, as we have used international universities instead in the past, this means we will not have a local PFRO as a collaborator. I'm not sure what PFRO means. Professional research organisation, perhaps, or?
Probably yes. Not real keen on overseas research. I want the research in Australia. I'd probably say no to that one. I've had a previous situation where somebody wanted to use an overseas research organisation. A research organisation, and I've really been very sceptical about the IP and all those sorts of issues, even though it may be residing in Australia. Let's support Australian universities, folks. Let's not go overseas and get them. Look, I'm not going to say no. I can't say that because I don't want to sort of cut off a nose to spite my face if there is a very compelling reason for it. So, yeah, I won't say no, but I want to see a very compelling reason for using an overseas research organisation.
And that leads us to the next question. Is there an advantage or a disadvantage to bring overseas collaborators?
I'd say a disadvantage.
Great, thank you. From an anonymous attendee, and we still have a couple of hundred people here still online, and the questions are coming through still. So thank you everyone for your patience. Can we include costs already incurred toward a project if we've already started looking at it but haven't applied it yet? For example, research costs to date.
Unfortunately, the only costs that we can include in the project are costs that commence from the date you sign the project agreement. So that may be, the 1st of July, it may be the 1st of August, but sorry, it's when we actually sign the project agreement, costs can start being accrued and allocated to the project from that time. So it's unfortunate, but that is the case. we will let you put a deposit on a piece of equipment or whatever, but we won't include that deposit in the costing. It'll be the subsequent payments that you may want to be able to, you can't claim those if they're within the project period.
Adam Johnson asks, if export percentage of current business is currently high, 60 to 80%, would the scoring for this project be based on a relative increase, higher scoring for higher export growth?
I think you can take it for granted that if you're currently exporting and you're going to continue that level, we will have a little bit of latitude in the way we score that particular one, because we've already encountered that issue. It's a difficult one for us to do. So just put something in in your sales projections that talk about export growth, etc., and we'll certainly not penalise you for that occurring.
Great, thank you. Wayne wonders, actually, I think has a recommendation to have a link in our guidelines to financial viability. So I think we should take that and have a look at that, make sure we have the link in our guidelines for financial viability, Jane. I'm not sure if it's there currently. Thanks, Wayne. Internet of Things, question from Anonymous. How about the Internet of Things?
Depending on what you're doing, we've got one project going at the moment, which is a company doing Internet of Things on steroids. So it's a great shining example to Australian manufacturing of how to use the Internet of Things to digitise your production facility, from basically the design, CAD, all the way through to shipping, service, warranty, replacement, etc. Totally digitised. We have an example of that already. It's not quite finished yet. It's one of our earlier projects. So you could put it in, but I would tend not to repeat a project. If we've already got a shining example with Australian manufacturing, like a particular sort of service or whatever. And by the way, we do ask you to allow AMGC to participate with you in site tours or sharing your technology at the end of the project, because we want to share the technology in Australia. We don't want to, just give it to one company and not sort of be able to sort of let Australian industry generally sort of share in that. And that might be in form of PR or whatever, just to show what we're doing. But getting back to your question, I won't say no, but it's a little difficult to say a definite yes, if you know what I mean. Okay,
thank you. Bill asks, where, if any, can we read more about some of the past funded project success stories, please? And if I can jump in very quickly, on the AMGC website, there's a tab called Projects. It's on our homepage. It's just a tab. It says Projects. You can see all our previously funded projects, and you can download a report. We have over 80 projects currently underway, and you can see all of the different types of projects we have underway across Australia, and they're amazing stories. But if there's anything you'd like to add, Jane and Mark, to that?
Fine.
Oh, good. All right.
Yeah, that's the best place for sure.
Thank you. Publicly funded research organisations, PFRO. Thank you. And I'll just remind folks to please use the Q&A button down the bottom. There's a little Q&A bubble. There's still a bit of messages going into the chat, and I'll try and get to those, but the Q&A function. This is from Lee Finnier. Regarding IP, if it's a funded project, is there any requirement to share IP with other businesses, or is it your comment just about PR?
No, you retain the IP in the project. The project IP is retained by the lead applicant, unless there is some negotiation with some of your collaborators. That's up to you. But our project agreement basically said it is retained by the lead applicant. We will not, in any shape or form, disclose your IP, any confidential nature, in any of our PR, in any of our website descriptions, etc. That will always remain totally confidential. We will not publish anything without your approval on an ongoing basis.
Terrific. Thanks, Mark. And I think we just have One last question here. I'm just in the chat forum. Thanks everyone for your feedback, and we certainly hope this has been of use, and we've really enjoyed doing this today actually. So thank you very much. And I guess one question is, what is the interaction between AMGC and other government funding agencies working together, as one grant completion may lead to other agencies in the future? So I think it's just the, you know, that collaboration and the different types of grants available today.
Yeah, I think I answered this question previously. Sometimes they can run concurrent, but as long as, and Jane pointed that out, you've got to be able to sort of quarantine your funding, your labour, your invoices between those two. And I'll be aware of that. You know, there will be a relationship that we will develop that'll, you know, rely on integrity and trust, etc. So I look to you to give me that information on a very, confidential basis. But you know, there may be more funding programs come up which you'll want to take advantage of. Yeah, by all means, I won't stop you, as long as you can maintain that sequestration or division between the various projects that you're working on.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, everyone. That concludes our event and our webinar. I think we've exhausted all of the questions. Over 40 questions came through. So thank you very much. Excellent questions. We hope this has been of value. Good luck as you put in your application. Any questions, please email the alias there, applications@amgc.org.au. Visit our website. And thank you very much. And we're very proud of Australian manufacturing. Thank you. Goodbye.